We continue now at the top of Daf Dalet Amud Beis in Meseches Taanis. This is Taanis Daf 4b. The Gemara here is addressing the line in the Mishnah which says we only ask for rain near the time of the rain, meaning at the end or after Sukkot. And so the Gemara now says in this second version, let us say that this line in the Mishnah is Rabbi Yoshua, he d'amar mishas anachaso. Let's say this line in the Mishnah is Rabbi Yoshua, who says that we begin saying Mashav Aruch Mar Goshem at the end of Sukkot from the time that we put down the lulav and esrog. And that's exactly what the Mishnah is saying, is that we don't mention Mashav Aruch Mar Goshem until the time of the rainy season. So the Gemara says, no, Amar Rava says, Afilu Tamer Rabbi Eliezer. You can even say that this line in the Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer, who says that we say Mashav Aruch Mar Goshem from the beginning of Sukkot. She'ela l'chud v'hazkara l'chud. Like the Gemara said before, asking is one thing and mentioning is another thing. So it could be that Rabbi Eliezer says when it comes to mentioning, we do it from the beginning of Sukkot. But when it comes to asking, we of course wait until the end or after Sukkot, because it's at that point in time that we actually want the rain to come. That's the actual rainy season. The Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer ha'over lifnei ateva v'chulu. Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah said that you stop saying Mashav Aruch Mar Goshem at Musaf on the first day of Pesach. So the Gemara says, Uraminu, we have the following contradiction from a Brisa. The Brisa says, Ad Mosai Shoel in Asagasham, until when do we ask for rain? Meaning, until when do we say V'sein Talmud Mater? Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ad Sheyavor HaPesach. Rabbi Yehuda says you say it until the end of Pesach, meaning even through the entire Chol HaMoed, you say V'sein Talmud Mater Levracha. Rabbi Meir Omer Ad Sheyavor Nisan, and Rabbi Meir says you say it through the entire Nisan. So in any case, we have a contradiction of Yehuda. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says you stop Mashav Aruch Mar Goshem on the first day of Pesach. And in the Brisa, he says you continue with Saint Talmud Mater until the end of Pesach. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Chisda says, Lo kash, it's not difficult. Kan lishol, kan lahaskir. In one case, we're talking about asking. In one case, we're talking about mentioning. When it comes to mentioning, Mashav Aruch Mar Goshem, that stops on the first day of Pesach. When it comes to asking, we continue to ask through the entire Pesach. Mishal shol v'ozil, we continue to ask again through the entire Pesach. Lahaskir, when it comes to mentioning, b'yom tov harishon pasuk, you stop already on the first day of Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, Amar Ula says, Hadar Rav Chisda kasha kechometz l'shinayim u'cha'ashin le'inayim. This answer of Rav Chisda is difficult, like vinegar to the teeth and like smoke to the eyes. Uma b'makom sheino shoel masker, because if in a situation when we're not asking, we mention, meaning when we begin to say Mashav Aruch Mar Goshem at Sukkot time, we're not yet saying V'sein Talmud Mater. You mention when you don't ask. So b'makom sheshoel, so in a situation where we're continuing to ask, meaning through Pesach, according to Rabbi Yehuda the Brisa, you continue to say V'sein Talmud Mater through Pesach. So Eino Din Shei Masker. So certainly we should continue to mention and say Mashav Aruch Mar Goshem. So you can't say there's a distinction here between mentioning and asking. And so the Gemara answers, Elo Amar U. Rather, Ula says, Trei Tanoi, I'll leave it to Rabbi Yehuda. There's really a machlokas Tanoim. What exactly Rabbi Yehuda says? And Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, that's one version of Rabbi Yehuda, you say until the first day of Pesach. And Rabbi Yehuda of the Brisa is the second version of Rabbi Yehuda, you say throughout the entire Pesach. The Gemara continues, Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yosef says he's going to offer a second answer. Mai ad sheyavor ha-Pesach. What does it mean in the Brisa when Rabbi Yehuda says you continue to say V'sein Talmud Mater until the end of Pesach? It doesn't really mean you say it throughout Pesach. Rather, what it means is ad sheyavor shliach tzibor rishon hayored b'yom tov rishon shel Pesach. It means until the first shliach tzibor on the first day of Yom Tov, until he finishes. Meaning exactly what it says in the Mishnah. You do it through Shacharis, and then at Musaf, that's when you stop. But the Gemara says, Amar le Abayas. Abayas said to him, to Rav Yosef, She'ela b'yom tov mi'ika. Is there any asking for rain on Yom Tov? In other words, the statement in the Brisa was, we stop asking for rain, or we continue to ask ad sheyavor ha-Pesach. But if it's talking about the first day of Yom Tov, we don't ask at all on the first day of Yom Tov of Pesach. So what would it mean that you continue to ask through Shacharis of the first day of Yom Tov? It wouldn't make sense if we don't ask on Yom Tov. And so the Gemara says, Amar Lei said to him, yes, Shoel Metorgamon. There is asking on the first day of Yom Tov of Pesach. We do ask for rain. The Metorgamon, the translator, he asks for rain. Rashi over here explains, Amar Lei in She'ela de Metorgamon b'drasha shu dorish. When they would have a drasha that the person would darshan, Omer birchas She'ela levada. There would be a disseminator of the drasha, and he would say a birchas She'ela, he would say a bracha that was asking for rain, and that's what we're referring to. That goes again through Shacharis, and it stops at Musaf. So the Gemara says, does that make any sense? Is the Metorgaman going to ask something that the tzibor doesn't even need? Rashi over here says, now is the time for the rain to stop. It's not derech eretz to ask for something in the congregation that's not really needed, so that doesn't make sense. And so the Gemara says, you're right, Ella rather, go back to the original answer, go back to the answer of Ula. There are two Tanoim according to Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara continues, Rabba Amar, Rabba says another answer, Mai ad sheyavor ha-Pesach, what does it mean in the Brisa when Rav Yehuda says until Pesach finishes, ad sheyavor zman shchitas ha-Pesach? What it means to say is that it's until the time of the end of the shchitas ha-Pesach, meaning it's referring to the Karban Pesach. Uketchilaso kein sofo, and the same way we start is the same way we finish. Matchilaso mazkir afal pi she'eino shoel, just like in the beginning we start mentioning Mashav Baruch Amar Goshem even though we're not asking. Afsofo, so too when we conclude, mazkir, we continue to mention afal pi she'eino shoel, even though the person is not asking. Rashi over here says, Ad sheyavor zman shchitas pesach chatzos yom de'arba aser. Ad sheyavor chatzos dainu kol tfilas yotzer. In other words, the point is, until the chatzos, which is the time of the shchita of the Karban Pesach, that's the time where we're asking for rain, and then we actually stop asking for rain. It means on the 14th already of Nisan, we're stopping to ask before we stop from mentioning. V'yashmin and Rav Yehuda is teaching us the mincha da'arvei psachim, that at mincha and erev Pesach, afagav d'matzlina and tefillah schol, even though that's a regular weekday tefillah, mefaschinon, we're going to stop saying v'sein talamoter v'lo yomer v'sein talamoter. You're not going to say talamoter. V'afagav d'medacharinon ad l'machar, even though we're still mentioning it until the next day b'musafin, even though we're still mentioning all the way until musaf. Posek ha'sheila b'tfilas mincha shel erev yontiv arishon. Still, we stop asking in the tfilas mincha of erev yontiv. V'hazkara sheyachol hasker b'yomtiv masker at tfilas musaf shel yomtiv arishon. We continue to mention even though we're no longer asking. And kitchila, so that's what the Gemara said. It's just like when we begin to mention shomazkir tchila b'yomtiv achron shel chag, we begin to mention already in the last day of yomtiv of Sukkot. Ve'eno shol ad la'achar chag, yet we don't ask until after Sukkot. So kach b'sofa, the same thing when we conclude. Eino shol b'mincha, you don't ask at mincha already erev yomtiv arishon when it's already erev Pesach. Umazkir ad musaf shel yomtiv arishon, but you mention until musaf of the first day of yomtiv. Now over here, we can't ask any questions. Is there any asking on Yontif? Because again, already you're stopping already by Mincha and Erev Yontif. So there was a theoretical possibility to say it on Erev Yontif, and we're saying no, you stop on Erev Yontif, even though you continue to mention Mashav Ruach Mor Goshen. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya says back to Rabbah, challenging Rabbah's answer, Bishlam Tchila. So I understand when you start. So Mazkir, makes sense that you start to mention even though you haven't asked. Haskara nami ritzoi she'elahi, because the haskara is like a ritzoi of the she'ela. In other words, you're mentioning it in order as an introduction, so to speak. Praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the rain, and then you're going to ask. Elasofa, but when you're concluding, my ritzoi she'ela, what's the point of mentioning if you're never going to come to a situation of asking? If now is the time to stop asking, why would you continue mentioning? In other words, mentioning is like a prerequisite for asking. So if we stop saying v'sein talamoter, there'd be no reason to continue saying Mashav Baruch Mor Goshem on Pesach. And so the Gemara again says, Ela machvarta kedu'ula, rather go back to Ula's answer. Again, there are two Tanoim, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rashi over here explains, the Hazkara Nami Tzorach She'ela, mentioning is part of the She'ela, Shemiratza Tchila, because again, first the person appeases, L'fishi Yefshar L'lishal B'yantiv, you can't ask it on Yantiv, V'kevan Dika She'ela Basrei, Mazkir Hu L'ratzuya B'alma, since eventually, after Yantiv, you're going to start saying V'sein Talamoter, you begin to say Mashav Ruach, that's a form of appeasement, that's like a prerequisite for the asking. Avol Sova, but when you're concluding Lamahu Masker, what's the point of mentioning Hoel Veno Tzarech Lishol Mikan Veilach if you're not asking anymore? Hakevan Daf Sakt Me'esmol Galisa Daitach Delo Nichalach Behu. V'amai Masker, if you already stopped mentioning from Erev Yontif for Saint Talamoter, so it shows you don't want the rain, so what's the point of mentioning it? So it doesn't really make any sense to say that Kitchiloso Kain Sova, that the conclusion should be the same as the beginning. The Gemara continues, Amar Ravasi, Amar Rav Yochanan. Ravasi says in the name of Rav Yochanan, Halachik Rav Yehuda, the halacha is like Rav Yehuda. This is referring to Rav Yehuda in our Mishnah, meaning that you begin to say Mashav Baruch Mor Goshem on the last day of Yontiv of Sukkot. So the Gemara says, Amar le Rav Zeir le Rav Asi. So Rav Zeir said to Rav Asi, Umi Amar Rav Yochanan Hachi. Did Rav Yochanan really say that halacha is like Rav Yehuda? We begin to say Mashav Baruch Mor Goshem and Musaf on the last day of Sukkot on Shmini Atzeres. But we learned in the Mishnah, B'shlosha b'Mar Cheshvan Shoal and Esagashamim. You start to say V'sein Talamoter. You start to ask for rain on the third of Mar Cheshvan. And Rabbi Gamliel Omer b'Shivabo. And Rabbi Gamliel says we begin on the seventh day of Mar Cheshvan. V'yomer Rabbi Lazar, and Rabbi Lazar says halacha Rabbi Gamliel. The halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel. And so the Gemara is assuming if the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel, you start asking on the seventh day of Mar Cheshvan. That's when you should start saying Mashav Baruch Mor Goshem as well. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say you begin to say it on the last day of Sukkot? So Amar Lei, so he said to him, Gavra Karamis. What kind of question is this? You're asking a contradiction between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar. Maybe they have different opinions. Rabbi Yochanan says the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, you begin on Shmini Atzeres at Musaf. And Rabbi Lazar says the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel, you begin on the seventh day of Mar Cheshvan. And the Gemara continues, Iba Yisem, if you want, I could say another answer. Lokash is not difficult. Kan lishol, kan lahazkir. In one case, we're talking about asking. Rabbi Elazar is saying we ask for the rain. V'sein Talmud Matar, that's on the 7th day of Mar Cheshvan. And Rabbi Yochanan is talking about when we begin to mention. So that follows Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that it's at Musaf on Shmini Atzeres. But the Gemara says, V'amar Rabbi Yochanan, but Rabbi Yochanan said, B'mokum sheshoel mazkir. Rabbi Yochanan made a comment that in the time that you ask, that's when you mention. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan linked the she'ela to the Haskara. So it sounds like whenever you begin asking, if you're going to begin, let's say on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan, that's when you should begin to mention. So the Gemara said, no, that's not what Rabbi Yochanan meant. Hahulav saka itmar. Rabbi Yochanan there meant in terms of stopping. In other words, when you stop asking, let's say you stop asking on Erev Pesach, so then you're going to stop mentioning as well. But he wasn't talking about when you begin. It's possible that you begin Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem before you ask. But the Gemara says, one second, Vam Rabbi Yochanan, but didn't Rabbi Yochanan say, Hischil lahazkir, Maschil lishol, that when you begin to mention, that's when you begin to ask. And Pasak milishan, when you stop asking, Posik milahazkir, that's when you stop mentioning. So they are linked both in the beginning and the end. And so the Gemara says, Ella rather, lokash, it's not difficult. Halon halahu, it depends if you're talking about for us. It depends if you're talking about for them in Eretz Yisrael. And Rashi over here explains, Halon v'halahu livnei Bavel, for the people of Bavel, sheyesh lanu tvu peiros besad, that we have grain, we have fruit in the fields, called Tishrei, the entire Tishrei. So ein mazkir not shiva b'mar cheshvan. We don't mention Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem until the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. V'sham shoalim, and that's also where we ask. In other words, in Bavel, that's when you delay everything. You delay Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem, you delay V'sein Talmud Matar, Kidam Rabbi Yochanan, that's what Rabbi Yochanan was saying. Maschil lahazkir, maschil lishol. When you begin to mention, that's when you begin to ask. It's all linked at the same time. V'halahu, but over there we're talking about Eretz Yisrael. Livnei Eretz Yisrael, for the people of Eretz Yisrael. To Kotzrin b'Nisan, they already harvest in Nisan v'Osrin b'Tishrei, and they gather everything up in Tishrei. Maskirin b'Yom Tov v'Achron Kreb Yudah. They can already begin mentioning Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem on the last day of Yom Tov of Sukkot. The Omer Rav Asi halacha kamoso, because Rav Asi said the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So there's really just a distinction between the people of Bavel and the people of Eretz Yisrael. But the Gemara asks, Ma'ishno l'didan, but what's really the difference for us? The Islon Piri B'Davar, like we just said, there are fruits in the fields, and therefore we should delay saying Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem until Mar Cheshvan. But l'ditunami, for those in Eretz Yisrael also there's a reason to delay. Islu Oli Regalim, you should delay because of the Oli Regalim. People are traveling for the holiday, and therefore we should delay asking for rain so that people can travel without it having to rain on them. So the Gemara says, no, Kikam Rabbi Yochanan, when did Rabbi Yochanan make his statement? Bisman Shein Beis HaMikdash Kaim. He's talking when there's no Beis HaMikdash. In a time when there's no Beis HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael, so there already there's no travelers. You can start saying Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem a little earlier. But again, for the Bnei Bavel, there'll be a bit of a delay. Gemara says, Hashta das lahachi, but now that you gave this answer, that we're talking when there's no Beis HaMikdash, Hava haliditu, you can actually say it's all talking about in Eretz Yisrael, but Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan bizman Beis HaMikdash Kayim, in a situation where the Beis HaMikdash is around, that's when you delay saying, again, because there's people traveling. Kan bizman shein Beis HaMikdash Kayim, and in a situation where there's no Beis HaMikdash, there's no people traveling, so then you should say it right away. You say it already on the last day of Yontif of Sukkot. And the Gemara continues, Va'anon, but what about according to us nowadays, the Islon Trei Yomei, outside of Eretz Yisrael, we have 2 days Yontif, because we have a suffix on Shmini Atzeres. We don't know if it's really Shmini Atzeres, or maybe it's a 7th day of Sukkot. And then when it comes to what we call Simchas Torah, there's also a suffix. Is that Simchas Torah, or really is Yontif already over at that point in time? Is it Shmini Atzeres, or is Yontif over? So Hechi Avdinan. So what should we do? If we're saying that we say Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem on the last day of Sukkot, but we have a doubt over here when the last day of Sukkot really is, when is Shmini Atzeres? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav says, Maschil b'musafin. So you begin on what we call Shmini Atzeres on the suffix day, whether it's day 7 or day 8. At Musaf, we start mentioning Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem. But then, uposek b'mincha arvis v'shachris, you should stop saying it mincha ma'ariv and shachris, meaning when mincha comes to Shmini Atzeres, even though you just said it at Musaf, don't say it anymore because maybe it's really the 7th day. And the same thing is true ma'ariv, same thing is true shachris. V'chozer b'musafin, and then you go back again on what we call Simchas Torah on day 9, which might be day 8. So then again, in Musaf, you're going to say it again, Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem. So basically, you say it of Musaf of Shmini Atzeres, you stop saying it, and then you say it again, Musaf of Simchas Torah. So the Gemara says, Amar Lahu Shmuel, so Shmuel said to them, Poku va'amru leila Abba, go and tell Abba, in other words, Rav, who just gave this answer. What kind of answer is that? Achar shasisu kodesh taseu chol. After you just declare that this day is a holy day, now suddenly you're going to go back and say it's really like a weekday, it's a mundane day. What's going on over here? Musaf, you're going to say Mashav Baruch Mordeh Goshem as if it's Shmini Atzeres, and then suddenly Mincha, the same day, you're going to decide that it's not Shmini Atzeres and you're not going to say it. That doesn't make any sense. So Elo Amar Shmuel, so rather Shmuel says as follows. Ma'aschil b'musafin uvemincha. you say it at Musaf, and of course you say it at Mincha as well, because Musaf and Mincha have to be the same. They have to be connected, because if you're assuming it's Shmini Atzeres at Musaf, you have to assume it's Shmini Atzeres at Mincha. Uposeg Arvis v'Shachris, then you stop at Ma'ariv and Shachris of the next day. That's already a new day, so you can say possibly that again, that now it's a new Shmini Atzeres, so to speak. And then you say it again at Musaf, you repeat and start again at Musaf of the next day of Simchas Torah, because again, that already certainly might be Shmini Atzeres, you would say it, even if it's not Shmini Atzeres. If it's post Shmini Atzeres, you're also going to be saying it. So that's what Shmuel's suggestion is. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Hey Amud Aleph.